Dates like December 7th and September 11th stir emotion in every American, even though they may not witness those horrific events firsthand. Whether people are sad, angry, distraught, heartbroken, or somber, these events stir every American heart on some level. Why? Because those dates were the last mornings for many of their fellow unsuspecting Americans. December 7th, 1941 marks the attack on Oahu, which took 2,403 American lives. September 11th, 2001 marks the attack on the Pentagon and World Trade Centers that took nearly 3,000 lives. These attacks mark the start of two long and bloody wars in American history. These surprise attacks attribute their success to the reserved and blind mindset of the U.S., which was reluctant to be involved in the world prior to those attacks. Even though the intelligence may have been insufficient at the time to know the exact time and location of those attacks, America knew the Japanese and Al-Qaeda were vital security threats that should have been addressed and eliminated. American foreign policy is extremely important to help maintain national and world peace. As American priorities and circumstances have changed, its policies have naturally changed as well. America at times has tried to isolate itself from the world, like after World War I, while other times it has acted as the world's policeman, engaging in conflicts such as the Korean War and the Vietnam War. While there are both positive and negative attributes to the isolationism and interventionism, each decision to use military force should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. American decisions to use military force is justified to protect America's national security, allies' national security, and to stop foreign citizens from being severely brutalized. But before using military force, America needs to ask itself if all their diplomatic and peaceful options have been considered, and if it is in America's best interest to do so. America may need to use military force when a country is evaluated and deemed a vital security threat. This is justified because a country that is a vital security threat is eliminated abroad, it will not strike America at home. America invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, and since then, Americans have experienced minimal attacks. Military force against foreign powers is appropriate and justified to stop vital security threats. In a letter speaking against the Manichaeans, St. Augustine addresses the role and functions for using military force and the justifications for war. He concludes that it is justifiable to use military force when the proper authority permits it, in the name of protecting its own citizens. The American government has a responsibility to protect its own citizens, so out of this obligation, America can use military force to protect its citizens. Emphasizing the need for security, President James Madison states, quote, "Security against foreign danger is one of the primitive objects of civil society. It is an avowed and essential object of the American Union." The Founding Fathers understood that the primary role and goal of the American government is to protect its citizens. However, American interests must be weighed upon before using military force. Because while it may be a warranted campaign, it may not be in America's best interest to do so. For example, China is considered a vital security threat to many military and political leaders, but it would not be in America's best interest to engage in a direct confrontation with China. This would cripple the world and American economy. America must sacrifice some comfort to ensure a peaceful relationship between these two superpowers. Engaging in a conflict against China would be contrary to more important interests that America has. Attacking China would not be a prudent decision. America has a history of being a part of global conflicts. Often after a conflict, America establishes a base in that country to maintain peace, order, and rebuild that country. The U.S. currently has 750 bases around the world in 80 different countries, including Japan, Germany, and Korea. The U.S. has realized the capability of having a network of bases around the world. It gives them the opportunity and capability of eliminating imminent threats against innocent life. Addressing the threats while they are still foreign eliminates the possibility for Americans to be attacked at home. America is justified in using military force to support its allies because this would protect life. The primary purpose of supporting American allies is to protect life and protect American interests. If America aids its allies and addresses threats while they're still manageable, the threats against America are less probable. Germany invaded Poland to start World War II and then swept across Europe. The strong German foothold would take the Allies years to uproot. The liberation of Europe took the Allies years, and it took countless lives to do so. When a cancerous threat such as Nazi Germany is allowed to grow, the process to fight back is slow. The liberation of Europe took many American lives, but what if America had stepped in 1939 with the full support of its military? The war would have been tremendously shorter, and the loss of life would have been severely decreased. If America addresses foreign threats before they become unmanageable, it eliminates the probability and the possibility for a loss of American life. In order to protect American life, America is justified to use military force to support its allies. Another way America can protect life is to stop foreign citizens from being severely mistreated. America is justified in using this military force. America is justified in using military force to stop citizens from being severely mistreated. Winston Churchill once stated, "Where there is great power, there is great responsibility. And where there is less power, there is less responsibility. And where there is no power, there can, I think, be no responsibility." The United States undoubtedly has great power, and with that power comes responsibility, whether wanted or not. Nearly every religion and worldview believes it is morally good to help those in need. But the main difference between America and other countries' worldviews and abilities is that America actually has the ability to help those in need. So America has a moral obligation to help foreign citizens who are being severely mistreated. While America has a moral obligation to help those in need, it also has an obligation to the people to maintain its reputation as a leading superpower. If America has the capabilities, yet refuses to help those in need, it can jeopardize America's reputation. When America has that capability and chooses not to, it opens the gate for next leading powers such as Russia or China to step into that position. While this may seem like a good thing that America does not have to send money and troops to help other citizens, it actually is contrary to American interests. It is contrary to American interests because Russia or China or the next leading superpower does not hold the same values America does. America is a front runner for liberty, freedoms, human rights, but the next country, like China, does not hold the same values. This past February, America diplomatically boycotted the Beijing 2022 Olympics. And with that, this means that America sent its athletes to Beijing, but it did not send its government officials to Beijing. This was to put pressure on China to stop its infringement on human rights. America cannot trust that the next leading superpower will have the same interests that America does. America needs to maintain its status as a leading world power by providing support to its foreign citizens, even if that means deploying the military. While Americans may be justified to use military force to protect its national security, allies' national security, or to prevent citizens from being severely mistreated, all other diplomatic and peaceful options should be considered before using military force. Genesis tells us that man is created in God's image, and therefore is unique and valuable. Since life is valuable, service members should only be put in harm's way when necessary. While it is sometimes necessary, this decision should not be made lightly. Another hesitation with deploying American troops is that the government has invested great resources into its service members. The government should value life because of the morals, but on a practical level, America should value life because it has poured many resources into its service members to become educated and trained. An analysis showed that it costs $5.6 million to train an F-16 pilot, and it costs $10.9 million to train an F-22 pilot. Since America has poured millions of dollars into training its service members, these service members should not be put in harm's way without necessary cost. Since deploying troops overseas has a greater risk of loss of life, capture, or even death than being stationed at home. Since deploying the troops risks valuable resources, diplomatic options should be considered and evaluated before using military force. Now, some say it is very expensive to maintain a military and engage in foreign affairs, so it is not worth engaging in those foreign affairs. It is agreed that America spends a plenitude of resources on its military. Since 9/11, America has spent $2.3 trillion in Afghanistan. And America has spent $778 billion in 2020 on its military. America undoubtedly spends more on its military than any other country, spending more than any other country, spending more than the next 11 countries combined. However, tremendously reducing or ceasing to spend money on the military or foreign aid would lead to attacks in the American home front and the continuing suffering of others. Safety is generally more important than the finances used to ensure that safety. If America does not address threats and maintain a strong military, it opens the door for other dominant countries to step into very powerful positions in the world. America is still under heavy stress from the COVID-19 pandemic and has severely cut back on military spending and its international presence, such as in Afghanistan. These things have not helped deter the Russian invasion of Ukraine. America has displayed a rather weak stance over the past year, and Russian leader Vladimir Putin has capitalized on American unpreparedness. America must sacrifice financially to protect Americans physically. America can sacrifice financially because of its foundational values, view life and liberty, or it values life and relationship as more important than money. America spends billions of dollars to help foreign countries, to help rebuild those countries, as well as in humanitarian projects. Matthew 6 teaches that money is a temporary possession, while relationships are an eternal investment. Since money is temporary and relationships are eternally forged, America is justified in using military force to protect life and relationships. There's always room for improvement, and America can undoubtedly be more effective and efficient with its military spending. But for America to cease or severely decrease its military spending, it would be catastrophic for the nation and the world. Some say it is very expensive to maintain a military. Many isolationists say America should not interfere with other countries' problems because it's not America's responsibility. There is truth to the idea that America needs to respect the sovereignty and independence of other countries and encourage that they defend themselves. However, this does not mean America should pull out every military asset it has in other countries. In 1966, in the heat of the Cold War, French President de Gaulle requested that America pull out its troops in France in order to have independent relationships with the Soviet Union. America did so out of respect for French sovereignty. Today, there are a variety of reasons that a country might not want America's presence in their country, whether for independence reasons or for a dislike or distrust of the West. If there is no legal contract keeping America there, and that country is an ally, then America has no right being there. And because if America stays, it would risk violating its very own values it swears to protect. While America's primary responsibility is defending itself, it is a leader in the world. And as a leader, it has the responsibility to help those and defend those who cannot defend themselves. Some say it is not America's responsibility, and other countries should just figure out for themselves. This is a narrow-minded mindset because it only promotes America's short-term interests. America must be the Good Samaritan of the world. Even though the government's primary responsibility is to keep Americans safe, this is often done by keeping other countries stable. With the withdrawal of American forces in Afghanistan this past summer, the Taliban has completely taken back over the country. While America has removed the constant strain of having troops deployed in Afghanistan, it also has removed the security we had there. Afghanistan is now considered just as much of a security threat as it has been in the last 20 years to both Americans and Afghans. The withdrawal was not effective because within weeks, Afghanistan became a place where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was constantly threatened. As argued above, life is more important than materials, so some say we should not use military force to protect natural resources. It is true that life is more important than materials, and the U.S. and deploying the military should only be made when necessary, or deploying the military should only be made when absolutely necessary. And the U.S. should not use military force when it to protect natural resources that it could produce itself. While using military force puts Americans at risk, protecting natural resources can be appropriate and justifiable if it is vital for America and its economy and world economy to function. This also protects life. During the Great Depression, when the economy was unstable and weak, nearly 50% of children did not have adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or education. When the economy crashes, basic living conditions crash as well. While the U.S. may be able to sustain itself with with the fluctuation of an economy and with the fluctuation of natural resources, this fluctuation of the economy puts millions of lives at risk. While the U.S. may be able to sustain itself with some products such as petroleum, it may not be able to do that with other natural resources. The U.S. should seek alternate sources for finding these natural resources. This can be done by exploring options within its own borders, such as America has done some with petroleum products, as well as looking to allies to find it as a source for these natural resources. The military should be a last resort to acquire these needed resources. However, the consequences of not having these resources should also be evaluated. America is left to decide if it wants to be more on the isolationist or interventionist side of things. Should America be a leader in the world and deploy the military liberally, or should America intervene, or should America look internally and solve problems there, or in that foreign issues solve themselves? America should find a balance between these two things, both isolationism and interventionism, because one extreme or the other could be detrimental to Americans. America needs leaders who have the wisdom to discern if all other peaceful and diplomatic options have been explored before using military force. After events such as Pearl Harbor or 9/11 attacks, leaders feel they lack the ability to protect their citizens. So as Christians, we need to pray for those who have the weight of using military force or not. And we also need to pray for the service members who are in the danger themselves. Luckily, for many Americans, they do not bear the weight of sending or not sending our nation's warriors into battle. But we are not completely isolated from this issue. Americans need to vote for those who will properly evaluate if America's national security is threatened, allies' national security is threatened, or foreign citizens are severely mistreated. Educate yourselves on current world issues, because public opinion influences leaders to lead for the best interests of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, for that passionate and informed perspective there. Can you clarify a little bit what you mean by military force? Are we talking boots on the ground? Are we talking drones? I assume we're not talking nuclear. What do you think would be appropriate in these types of situations?
Sure. Right before I said my thesis earlier, I said that each decision should be made on a base-by-base basis. So I think with that, evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So with that, we should look to see if drones might be the best option, if boots on the ground might be the best option. I think military force would include, anything with the military and then using force. So ships, planes, boots on the ground. I think that all encompasses that. But I think it really depends on the situation. So let's take Ukraine, for example. Right now, the U.S. is put on sanctions on Russia, but they have not put boots on the ground because they don't want a direct confrontation with China, with Russia. So.
And I think you halfway got to my follow-up already, but I am wondering if the advent of atomic warfare and nuclear era has been a real game changer in terms of how we think about military force and when we ought to deploy it.
Sure, I think it's kind of the idea of mutual destruction. I think that's what held off on during the Cold War. Russia didn't want to send its nukes over here, and we didn't want to do that either because that would be very bad for the world. So I think with that, countries are very, very hesitant to throw that idea out there. That's a very sensitive topic for countries to actually evaluate. And I think countries like China, America, Russia, I really don't think that it would come to nuclear warfare, because if that did, I think that'd be very unfortunate for this Earth.
Great job. There were some things that I learned more because of the way you said them, so thank you. You regularly refer to threats to America that justify. So you seem to, I would like to ask about an unspoken hierarchy that you seem to, that I would love to know about. You talk about a preeminent focus, but it shifts. Like if our military option should be because they are mistreating and abusing their citizens, but yet we don't because it's economic. I know it's a case by case.
Yeah.
But is there an unspoken hierarchy of threats to act upon? Meaning that you start with national economic, then you go to moral, then physical, then what is the order in which is most important that usurps the other?
Sure. I think the big idea is that we need to do what we can, but still not violate other more important American interests. So like with China, they are, there's great evidence that they have mistreated different parts of their country. But China is a very strong world power. So with us being in a conflict with China, that would create potentially another world war. That is not what we want at all. So we need to, again, I'm trying not to say evaluate on a case-by-case basis, but it's surely depending on the country that has that issue, and what we can do to support that country without weakening our own country in a place where, like, we want to protect our. So I guess what I would say is that America's safety is priority. So we can't extend ourselves too much where we can't protect ourselves. So we can't lend a helping hand when we ourselves need that lending hand. So we're in a position right now, I believe, that we can help other countries still. While we still have internal problems and everything like that, we do have the responsibility, since we have great power, to help those in need. So with the hierarchy, we do have, I think it would come down to national security. That's probably the most important. And then right alongside that is our allies, because without our allies, we're very vulnerable. We have 750 bases around the world. That's incredible. As in, like, that's just crazy to think about. We have bases in Africa, almost every continent. So our allies is very important to help secure. And then I think almost like a sub-point is that moral idea, where we need to look at if foreign citizens are being severely mistreated. What level are they being severely mistreated? Is it genocide? If it's genocide, then yeah, what can we do to help stop that? Does that answer your question?
It does. Can I have a follow-up?
For sure.
So you mentioned that if we don't do something in a certain category, that it can affect our status as a superpower. So is the goal then, at that point, our status as a superpower, or is our goal one of those others in the hierarchy? Sorry to mess with you.
Our status as a leading superpower and our reputation as that is to prevent other countries to kind of steer the world on how they want it. So America, America traditionally values human rights, freedoms, and liberties that other countries do not. So that's kind of my point with the diplomatically boycotting the Beijing 2022 Olympics is because China, who would presumably, or Russia would be presumably the next one to step into America's role, is we can't afford to have Russia or China steering the world on how they want it to be steered, because that could lead to very contrary interests to what America stands for.
Okay, last one.
Okay.
So where does that fit in the hierarchy? Because
In our
clearly that's part of, I mean, clearly that fits somewhere. If we're making decisions based on that, then it has
Sure.
to fit somewhere.
I think that's more of a general idea that we need to shoot for. I don't think we would wipe out another country because they're threatening us in regards to our reputation. But that's just more of a general idea. We want to maintain that status, I guess. But we wouldn't go to war because someone else is powerful. We go to war if they were threatening us.
I am curious, so maybe on the side of economic well-being, kind of twofold. You had your 4 factors that should be considered. So there's the America and our allies' economic well-being. Where do they fit into that scheme? And then secondly, as a alternative, I think you used the term diplomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Where do like economic sanctions or other economic types of things fit into that? Is that a peaceful means, or is that?
Yeah, so with the economic of our allies and ourselves, I wasn't able to put in my presentation, but I referenced World War I, where America lended support to our allies, and that drastically increased America's economy. So securing or helping our allies really helps the economy of our allies and America. And then with the diplomatic things like sanctions, the idea is that we are trying to preserve life, preserve preserve deploying the military, so we can put sanctions, try negotiations, and try to do everything we can before using military force. So some of my wording would be like diplomatic or peaceful options, not necessarily just anything that will prevent us from going to war, because war is generally generally isn't beneficial to America. Sometimes it is in regards to like the economy or something like that. But.
If threats to economic stability would justify us going to war, if we levied economic sanctions on another country, would that justify them initiating military action?
Yeah, I think this would be similar to the idea that we should protect our natural resources. So we need to protect, or we need to make sure we're not compromising ourselves in a way that would lead to American death. So, for example, like the Great Depression, that was just being the economic weakness that we were in, that put us at an extremely vulnerable state, and it also cost a lot of American life. So I think if it came to the point where, without using military force, America would be severely weak and it could lead to American loss of life, I think it could be justifiable. But I think, especially for something like economics, we would try to use everything we could without using military force.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, to put a finer point on it, is it seems like if we would be justified in going to war over economic stability, perhaps an economic sanction of a certain degree is actually some flavor. It's kind of a gray area between military force
Sure.
and diplomatic, because
Yeah, for sure. That for me, I was defining the military force as direct confrontation with that country. Sanctions and that kind of thing would be removing, like specifically like boots on the ground, firing weapons, that kind of idea. But I think it could be a good in between for just negotiations or using military force.
And then one other question that I'll try to ask now. You showed the chart that had two bars.
Yeah.
Of spending on the military.
Yeah.
And I think there's a phrase, carry a big stick.
Yeah. Big
So-
soft thing, carry big.
Yep. So I'm wondering, how does that interact? Because I think you're advocating both. Let me characterize what you said, and you can tell me I'm mischaracterizing. You're perhaps advocating to both carry a big stick and arguably use a big stick.
I'd say use a big stick when necessary. I think we need to try to avoid using military force, but I think often sometimes it may be necessary. So with that chart where I was comparing that, the next 11 countries don't equal how much America puts into its military defense, and that's not only just our national security, it's also for, world security. America's in a position right now acting as the world's policeman. I don't necessarily think that's the best thing for America to do, but I think for sure it should be intervening in different conflicts when it is vital for America to do so. But we are in a position where we are acting as, a policeman with the big stick. But when we use that, we need to be very intentional when we do so, because it does have catastrophic consequences for both American lives and families, and as well as foreign citizens and their people.
I'll kind of follow up on that idea. Do you see your thesis as contradicting any aspect of U.S. military policy currently? Are you kind of defending what we currently do or setting forth an ideal?
You mean in regards to the Ukraine situation, or just in history, or?
All of it in terms of maybe the hierarchy you've said,
Sure.
how you've explained things. Is that how we currently operate or not?
I'd say generally, kind of. So after World War I, we really isolated ourselves. I'd say that was one extreme that we wanted to avoid. And then right after World War II, we really swung the other side of the pendulum and intervened in Korea and Vietnam. I think both those things, we went too far. So we need to kind of find a balance in between those two things. I think right now, for the Ukraine situation, if I was in a position to make those decisions, I'd probably sanction a little bit more on Russia, but also I have the knowledge of, just a citizen versus someone who's much higher up in the government or the military, where they probably have a much clearer and fuller understanding of the situation there.
So aside from voting for you, what type of evaluation are you calling us to when you call us to be voting for someone that's in line with wise use of military action, given our history of leadership where we say we're one way and then a situation arises and make a decision to flip-flop? So what would you advise us as citizens to be evaluating when we're voting, questions we should be asking or things we should be attentive to, aside for voting for someone that's made a presentation and we know what you think?
Yeah. I think most political leaders have a history of being in politics, and so you can look at different decisions they made in the past, whether they lean more, or whether they have tendencies to be really intervening in a lot of different situations, or kind of just not hide, but conceal back into just work on American issues, and not really put a focus out there on foreign issues. So I think you can look at their past, and then also, especially right now, people will be asked, hey, what should we do in Ukraine? Hey, what should we do with China? Hey, what should we do with North Korea? These are very current questions that people are asked. So I think you can look at their answers and evaluate that on whether or not they would be a good person to lead our country.
You advocated to avoid military conflict with China. I believe you said or implied that I believe you implied that we should have engaged in World War II in 1939.
Yes.
Are those two positions consistent? What's different about China now than Germany in 1939?
With Germany in 1939, they had already taken over a country. They were already sweeping across Europe. They were in a global expansion. They were looking for global domination. And then the British and French, despite their best efforts, weren't able to stop them. With China, they're not necessarily actively expanding. They are putting in islands in the South Pacific. They are building islands to expand their borders. However, they're not taking over countries. They're not taking over, Japan or other like Korea, they're not taking over these different countries. So I think there is a difference between them actually crossing borders and sending like just completely taking over, and then also there's the aspect of, well, I don't know if I want to get into like the aspects of the Chinese persecution there in that aspect, but I think there's also very similar comparisons with how Nazi Germany was in the 1930s and how China is now.
If China invaded Taiwan, would that be the same?
So it's a tough one because Taiwan, like the Chinese government, you know, back in the later 1900s, the government, you know, moved to Taiwan, and then the communists came in, and that's how China is set up now. So Taiwan is really kind of like the last American, or the last influence the West has in China. Taiwan is. So if China invaded Taiwan, I think we would do everything we could to avoid war. But if it came down to it, it could be justifications for war. I think it definitely could justify war because they are unjustifiably persecuting or severely mistreating the Taiwan people. But if it came down to it, I think it's justifiable to go to war with China. But I don't know if it'd be in complete American interest to do so. That's kind of why we have to kind of balance that. Is it, yeah, it might be justified, but is it the best response?
Just a quick follow-up, I'm going to assume you'd probably say about the same thing with Ukraine in regards to Russia.
I think Russia's display of military force has been rather pathetic. So like Ukraine's not the size of Russia. It doesn't have nearly as many people. Like these are things Russia should have been able to come in and take over Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have done an amazing job defending their homeland and everything like that. But Russia is a world power. Ukraine is not necessarily that. So I think Russia would be much easier to fight in that sense. Like Russia doesn't even have a aircraft carrier. America has 10 super aircraft carriers. Like these are things that America could pretty easily beat Russia. With China, it has the economy. The economic power of China would be a huge thing to deal with if we went to war. China also has, well, both Russia and China have a ton of people that they could muster up into a fighting force.
Okay, left turn. If you're dealing with mostly boots on the ground, we have a new threat, which is a cyber attack type situation, and there's got to be some sort of, in your research, some sort of military response option for some major cyber attack.
Sure.
What kind of military force would be on the table at that point?
For our response to cyber attacks, if that cyber attack functioned as, let's say they took down the power grid, like the Chinese, I had in my full draft, I had I'm not sure if I left it in there or not, but China has the capabilities of, like they have hackers that could take down our power grid, or at least make it very vulnerable. So with that, if that'd be an act of war, if China did something like that. There's been cases where China has infiltrated and hacked government servers and something like that. If they had enough, if they did something enough to justify war, I think the power grid would be definitely justifiable to. That'd be a declaration of war, in my opinion.